All right, today we're going to dive into a real paradox. It's about a young woman who lived this incredibly short, hidden life, yet somehow became one of the most influential spiritual figures of the modern age. Her name? Therese of Lisieux. And her story? Well, it's basically a masterclass in how the smallest, most unseen things can have the biggest impact.
So you gotta ask, right? How is that even possible? I mean, how could someone with virtually zero worldly experience end up leaving such a massive mark on the world? That's the big question we're gonna try and unpack here.
Yeah, this is really the heart of it. And it's not just some old history lesson, you know? It actually makes you question our own ideas about what makes a life meaningful. I mean, think about it. We live in a world that is obsessed with big, loud achievements. So, is greatness really about public success? Or is it found somewhere else entirely? Let's see what she had to say.
I mean, on the surface, her life was, well, incredibly simple. She was born in France, and as a teenager, she entered this really strict, closed-off convent. And then she died of tuberculosis when she was just 24. Yeah, 24. Nothing about that resume screams global influencer, does it? But believe me, her writings were about to change everything.
And the key to solving this whole paradox, the answer, lies in this idea that she developed from her own life. She called it her little way. And it wasn't just a cute name. It was a full-blown spiritual revolution.
So what was so revolutionary about it? Well, it was just how accessible it was. You see, before Therese, holiness often seemed like this exclusive club for, martyrs or super mystics who did these incredible, heroic things. She came along and basically said, nope, anyone can be great. All you have to do is take your ordinary, everyday life and live it with extraordinary love. She would look at the lives of these huge, famous saints and just feel, well, small. She felt their path, this grand way, just wasn't for little souls like her. It was like looking up at this impossibly steep mountain. So she said, okay, I'm going to find a different way to heaven, a little way, something straight, short, and brand new. It's like everyone else was taking the stairs, and she decided to invent a spiritual elevator.
So, okay, how does this actually work in real life? Well, it all starts with just admitting your own smallness, radical humility, accepting that you can't do these massive things on your own. Step 2 is where the magic happens. You take the most boring, mundane tasks, we're talking washing dishes, dealing with that coworker who drives you nuts, and you turn them into acts of love. And the final piece, you just let go. You surrender and trust completely. She called this whole approach spiritual childhood. But look, this isn't just some nice, fluffy philosophy. It's a real practice. And the real test, as always, comes when life gets tough, or annoying, or just plain uncomfortable. Now, this quote might sound a little extreme, but for Therese, this was absolutely the key. She saw every tiny little irritation not as a burden to get rid of, but as a golden opportunity. It was her chance to prove her love in a real, concrete, and totally hidden way. And wow, was she committed to this. Her life in the convent was just filled with these little challenges. We know she'd eat food she hated without a single complaint. She wouldn't say a word about the bitter medicine or the constant biting cold. There's this one story where another sister is doing laundry and accidentally splashes her with dirty water. And what does Therese do? She just makes a point to smile. She even went out of her way to be around the people she found the most difficult. Incredible.
And get this, here's the real kicker. She did all of it in secret. She wasn't looking for a pat on the back or any sympathy. In fact, she said that the moment someone offered her sympathy for her struggles, her happiness just disappeared. The real value for her was in the fact that nobody knew. And this part is so crucial. These little acts weren't just some self-improvement project. She connected them to a much bigger purpose. See, she couldn't be a missionary herself, so she would offer up her small pains, her exhaustion, for missionaries working thousands of miles away. She truly believed her little, hidden sacrifice could actually give them strength.
But make no mistake, this little way was not an easy path. It didn't shield her from a massive spiritual crisis. Actually, it led her straight into one of the most intense, gut-wrenching trials of faith you can even imagine.
So as she's literally dying from tuberculosis, this young woman who had built her entire life on trusting God's love, she gets plunged into total spiritual darkness. She felt like heaven was just locked, shut, and that God himself had completely vanished.
And her own words from this time are just harrowing. She talked about feeling this wall rising up between her and God, cutting her off from any kind of comfort, any spiritual consolation. It was just pure, raw faith with absolutely zero emotional reward.
She even started having these profound doubts.
these temptations that struck at the very foundation of everything she believed. I mean, can you even imagine that? You build your whole life on the idea that God loves you, and then this voice in your head just relentlessly asks, "Are you sure? Has he ever actually told you that?"
And this, right here, is what makes her teaching so incredibly powerful. She did not give up. Faced with absolute spiritual emptiness, she just kept on doing her small acts of love. She chose to believe, not because it felt good, but as a pure act of her will. It was her perseverance through that darkness that really proved the power of her little way.
So, after this short, hidden, and profoundly difficult life, what was left? What was the legacy that just exploded out from behind those quiet convent walls and spread all over the world?
Well, true to form, she didn't see death as the end, not as a rest or an escape. For her, it was just the beginning of a real work, and she made this incredibly bold and beautiful promise about what she was going to do next. This is probably her most famous quote, this shower of roses. It's a symbol for all the help and good things she promised to send down to people from heaven. She had this absolute conviction that her real mission, her mission of love, was only just getting started.
And this is how it happened. This is how her voice finally broke free. Her journals were put together by her sisters into a book published just a year after she died. That book, Story of a Soul, became an instant global bestseller. It was translated into tons of languages, and it inspired millions upon millions of people with the message of her little way. Her last words? Reportedly, they were simply, "My God, I love you." She died exactly as she lived, with a simple, direct, total act of love, a complete surrender, even after a year and a half of feeling absolutely nothing.
And in the end, that's the real power of her idea. It kind of democratized greatness. It's a powerful counter-message to our modern burnout culture, right? It tells us that the daily grind, the small frustrations, the hidden acts of kindness, that's not just stuff to get through. That is the very material you use to build a meaningful life.
And that's really the challenge she leaves for all of us, isn't it? In a world that's always screaming for grand gestures and public validation, her life is a quiet whisper telling us to look closer, to look at the here and now. She suggests that maybe, just maybe, the biggest moments of our lives aren't the loudest ones at all, but the ones hidden in the tiny, unseen details that we choose to fill with love.